Well, hello there. This is D, and welcome to the Benzo Free Podcast, episode 130, 130, 140 something. I'm not sure. I don't have it in front of me, so whatever the number is on the podcast that you see there, that's the number this is. When I edit it, I'll go figure out what number this one is. I'm sitting here in my family room here in Colorado, and my dog Murphy is laying crashed out behind me. Finally, he's calmed down a little bit. Being still a puppy or teenager, I guess, since he's about 15 months now, he has a lot of energy. And I am spending some time by myself. My wife is again up at my in-laws' house, taking care of her dad and her mom. They are both in their 80s, and my father was just diagnosed with a sarcoma cancer, and they're starting chemo tomorrow on Friday. So it's been a real rough go for her and for us lately. We just went through this 2 years ago with all my parents and trips back and forth from Kansas City. If you've listened to the podcast, you were part of that. You know what that was like. And so now we're going through it with her dad, and this is just how things are. But it does seem to pile up, and it adds a lot of stress. And unfortunately, at the same time, I have neurological, I'm having some problems with anxiety and little nerve pain kind of poking me all different places. And then, of course, I have this stabbing pain in the outside of my right foot that unfortunately likes to kick in usually about 5 a.m. in the morning when I'm lying in bed. And it makes you afraid to go to bed because you're not looking forward to waking up to severe pain. So I'm doing everything I can to try to prevent that. And I'm going to talk more about that in a second. I got a couple topics I want to talk about. And one is, the first one is just kind of how we feel alone, like I'm feeling right now with benzo withdrawal and bind. Second is how we deal with new symptoms and what the tricks our mind plays with us. And the third is just our podcast overall and why I've lost some listeners and why things kind of quieted down for a while and why I think some people don't tune in to me anymore, and just to talk about that subject. So those are the three things. So first of all, backing up, like I mentioned, I'm feeling a little bit lonely. I'm going to pop up there this afternoon and take some things up to my wife and help them out with a few things. I've been up there once or twice, about twice every week right now, trying to help them. But at the same time, I need to stay here a lot, do some work. I'm really cut back on my work so I can help them more, but do some work like this podcast and mostly take care of the house and take care of Murphy. And it just, somebody has to stay in the house and help with that, although we do have some family and friends around who are helping with that too. But I'm feeling a bit lonely right now. And I think most of you know what that's like. Even for people like me and many of you who have a spouse or that close partner or somebody there to help you through all this, through bind and benzos. Even if you have that there all the time, you still feel lonely. I think many of us still feel lonely in our pursuit of healing and recovery. I say recovery, I'm just going to let it lie. Never mind. I'm learning to be a lot more myself lately with this new podcast and everything else, and I'm just going to stop trying to overcorrect myself. Let things be. This is who I am, and I like it. Anyway, I think whether you are really alone, like you're going through this all by yourself, and for those individuals, I truly feel for you. I've heard from many of you. I've worked with many of you, and I get it, and I know. And I'm so sorry. It is hard. But even for those of us who have somebody there, it's still nobody going through it with you. They still don't get it. They don't know the 24/7, 365 chaos that can be this condition. And so I think loneliness, feeling utterly alone, and also without the support of a good doctor or the support of a good counselor or the support of a good therapist. It's so hard to find anybody who really knows what we're going through and knows how to help us. And that makes us feel alone. And then I also know for many individuals, although I haven't had this as much, and I'm very grateful for that, but for many individuals, family and friends who don't believe you, who believe this is something else. This is either addiction or believe it's just you're not able to, handle anxiety or stress. They don't believe in the physical dependence, the physical damage this has done, the neurological damage this has done to our system. And that's a frustration. You feel more alone. So this is a very lonely condition for so many people, and I get that and I understand. And I think that's where the podcast and that's where support groups and discussion groups and all these places out there and videos and stuff come in handy, because it helps us feel a little less alone. But if you're feeling alone going through this, please know you're not alone in that feeling. I feel that even with a loving spouse who gets it for the most part. We all feel that aloneness going through this because it's so unrecognized. There's so much disbelief. There's just nobody has the patience, I think, to go through this with us, or very few have the patience, let's put it that way, to go through this with us, except for those of us who have to go through it. Because it can take a while. Not to be a downer, I'm just saying that. I just wanted to put that out there. I wanted to move on to the second item, which is just what we go through when we have new symptoms. And this is prevalent because I've had this foot pain come on, and then I had this neurological pain, which is just random buzz, zaps all over my body. And I know brain zaps are very common. This is more body zaps, but it's body pinpricks. It's like multiple people just sticking with pins, different spots. And I know it's just a really heightened nerve system. And I know part of it is the stress I'm under, an emotional stress that I'm dealing with. And I know part of it is just ABIND. And I know part of it is all kinds of things. And I go back to my basics. I go back to some meditation and yoga and exercise, and I'm really trying those things to see if I can get myself feeling better. But when you have foot pain and walking too much may be adding to it, well then what do you do? Or you have a bad back, like my back went out on me but last week, and it's really hard to lay in a certain position. Either my foot's going to kick in and suddenly shock me, or my back's going to go out, or I can't sit upright, or I can't relax, and all these things add to it. And then we start to over-question, overthink, overanalyze what's causing it. I know some of you go through this. I do this every time. It's the dance of the new symptoms, and we try to figure out what that trigger was. What caused this, or what's changed in my life? Anything that might have fed into it. When I got this foot pain, I finally realized, hey, I got to control my weight. I got to cut out my sugar. I just need to do something drastic because that's probably feeding it. And so I instantly went on a low-carb diet, a diet I've done before, a keto diet, and I just jumped into it. Now, my foot pain didn't go away. It eased for a bit, but then it came back again. And now I'm actually easing off that diet into more of just a general low-calorie diet, because I think too much protein made me too dehydrated, and maybe the dehydration is part of why I get the foot pain at night. You see the dance we have here? Or is it how I sit during the day? Is it the way my legs dangle? Is it how my foot is at night at sleep? Is it because I have it hanging down forward, or should I have it upright? Sometimes it goes out on me when I'm laying on my side, so I've tried to lay strictly on my back, and that's how I pulled my back out, because my mattress wasn't very supportive of that move, and I usually sleep on my side. So that happened. And then I'm thinking about, should I be taking a vitamin, a multivitamin? Should I be getting more B12 to help my nervous system, and some more magnesium and potassium? And maybe the low carb diet can't work because I need some bananas and I need some things. We keep going. I need some Gatorade. I got to take, got to get the electrolytes. But boy, that sure doesn't fit with a low carb diet. And we go on. And I should be exercising, but I can't exercise because being on my feet probably is making my foot worse. And now I got to go mow the yard, and I got to go walk the dog twice a day. So I get in 2 to 5 miles a day walking. And is that making it worse? Is that helping? I don't want to stop walking because then my weight's going to come on. And it's just, and you get this looping thought, these looping from hell thoughts that just don't stop. Because we so desperately want to ease this symptom. It doesn't matter what symptom is. It could be the extreme anxiety, big cognitive dysfunction. It could be DP, DR. It can be tinnitus. I get that all the time. It can be paresthesia, akaesthesia. Boy, whatever's kicking that off. This sugar sometimes has a big effect on that one. It can be whatever the symptom you're dealing with, muscle tears and strains and benzo belly and digestive issues, and your stomach's just churning like 90 miles an hour. There's so many symptoms out there. It doesn't matter the symptom, but when we get the new one, I don't know about you, but I start to overanalyze, and I try to figure out what might be causing it, what's setting it off, what's the trigger. Sometimes I think I find one. Many times I don't. Many times I go to the doctor, I get tested for all kinds of stuff, as I'm starting to do with my foot, and I did with my dysphagia, the difficulty swallowing, my throat tightening last year. And then after several months, or a few months, or whatever, it starts to fade on its own. Now I know the foot pain very well might not be related to benzos. And I want to mention that here because I do think we so often attribute symptoms too much to benzos too. Yeah, most of the time I have this default saying in my head, if it's not this, if it's not this, if it's not this, it must be benzos. And that's often the case. Maybe 70-80% of the time it is bind and it's heightened nervous system, neurological dysfunction that I have going on. And that's what's, adding to or causing the problem. But that's not always the case. And we have to be careful of attributing too much to it. It is very likely that my foot pain is plantar fasciitis or peroneal tendonitis or part of the cuboid problem or a fracture or neuropathy, which very well, if it is neuropathy, that's probably benzo related, but it could be total unrelated things and likely is. Now, might my bind be making the pain a little worse because we're over heightened? Yeah, that's very possible, but it very well might not be what's causing it. It might just be I've had bad shoes lately, and I haven't been walking with proper support, and I let my feet, and I used to sit on my feet. God, the stupidest thing ever. I would curl one foot underneath the other one and sit with one leg on top of my other foot. That has to have something to do with this. I've tried for years to stop doing this, and I don't do it much anymore, but it's just a habit. I have really short legs, and I don't sit comfortably in a chair. And yet I spend a lot of time in a chair. And so I'm always fidgeting. And I'm also ADHD, and I'm always fidgeting. I'm always looking for a new place to sit, and I'm always moving different directions. And a lot of times I don't even catch myself. That might be a factor. It might just be that I walk too much. It might be when I'm walking Murphy and he wants to chase a rabbit and I have to tug at him to get him to come back and I'm planting my foot down. That could also be a factor. There are so many factors. But we do this dance. We look for causes and everything. And because we desperately want answers. I desperately want answers. And I'm there right now. And I realize the most likely result in all of this. With this one, with my foot pain, there very well might likely be a foot cause. I don't get to see the neurologist until September, 3 months from now. That's a good referral. At least I can get in to see my foot surgeon, a doctor who worked on me before. And I got in to see him coming up Monday. So within a week, I got an appointment with him. So I'm really hoping he's going to find a cause, a physical cause in the foot for this pain. And we can start to work on it. But I don't know what to do. Do I put in, you know, it's like you watch videos on YouTube that tell you the complete opposite things to do. One says, do this stretch. The other says, never do this stretch. That's going to make it worse. Do this stretch. The other one says, stretches aren't going to work. You got to use inserts. The other one says, oh, don't put inserts in your shoes. They're just going to weaken your feet. You need to do it. It's a nightmare of conflicting information out there, whether you're doing a Google search or watching videos or whatever. I know I've been there a lot lately trying to find answers. Nothing quite fits what I'm going through right now. But in the end, we have to realize that this overthinking, this overstressing, this over questions, these incessant what ifs too, which is another piece of it, the what if saying, what if this gets worse? Right now, this pain kicks in and wakes me up sometimes at night, and I do not like it. What if it gets worse? I've had that thought through all my symptoms. Funny thing is it rarely got worse, or at least it rarely got so bad I couldn't handle it. It was more than not knowing when it peaked and not knowing what the cause was and not knowing how to manage it. And that would stress me out, and that would probably make it worse because I was so stressed. And that, in the end, I think is my point here. I understand trying to find causes, and I understand trying to overthink, and I understand trying to watch every single thing you ingest and put into your body and every step you take, and I understand, and every stressor that comes your way. But that stress of thinking that might be part of your problem in the first place. And sometimes the best solution, as I often come back to in this podcast, and this might lead us into the next topic, it's just our mindset. It's managing the anxiety. It's finding ways to help calm our system down. And finding a good mindset so that we don't let these things run away with us. And when we have heightened anxiety and cognitive difficulties and everything else going on, that's hard to do. And I get that. I really get that. And I go through them too. Anyway. Sometimes it's okay to be confused about the cause. It's okay to be looking for the trigger. Just don't do it for too long. At some point you have to back away and say, okay, I have the symptom right now. The best thing to do is for me to find a way to manage it. And it will fade on its own, and most of the time, by far, that's what happens. But as I mentioned, moving into our last topic, and this is an interesting one I came across the other day, and that is people listening to the podcast. I've lost a lot of listeners over time. I don't think I have. At one point, I was getting 4,000 listens a month on the podcast, and I was getting 100 plus links to my website a day, some pretty good numbers, and we were growing it, and we were, and it was doing good, and I was liking that. And most of my videos and my podcast episodes and stuff were getting, 200, 300, 400 hits, and that's pretty good for our niche, for what we're doing here. And some now have reached 1,000 or more, of course, because they've been out for a while. But a lot of that subsided and quieted down. And there's two things going on here. And the first one's pretty obvious. I took some time off. With my parents, that really slowed me down when I had to deal with their care for a year and a half. And then, of course, their passing. And then since then, I've had some mental difficulties and some stressors with that. I mean, it's grief. It's a grieving process. I lost both my parents, 2 cousins to COVID, my dog, and a good friend in a period of under 3 years. And that's a lot. So it makes sense that I'm having some psychological stress from that. That makes sense. And I got to allow myself to heal. And so I've taken time away, and I didn't produce as much content for a year or so. And I backed off on things, and I needed that time. I needed to heal a little bit. And of course, that's probably what have brought on some of the new waves. And of course, a couple bouts of COVID, which I do believe is directly related to my setback. And I still use the word setback. And we're going to get into that because that's the term that started all this. But started my, backing off and having some more symptoms and a new wave. And so anyway, the first thing is I just want to make sure I'm clear that I had to pull away a little bit. And that's why I had lost some momentum on the podcast, on Easing Anxiety channel and so forth. And I get that. But I think there's some more stuff going on. And I've heard this in some comments. I've heard it from some other people through some other sources. People that pass things on to me. Now, I'm not on social media at all. Except for promoting this podcast, so I just don't spend much time. Maybe I'll get on there a little bit, but I don't think it's beneficial to my healing right now, and I don't think it has been. I've never been a big one on social media. I think there's a lot of downsides to it. I think we have to be cautious there. But I do want to say that I don't know what people might be saying about me, about my channel, about my podcast on different boards and stuff. Maybe nobody talks about me. I mean, let's face it, one of the standards in all of our, FOMOs mindsets is that we think people think about us far more than they do. And the truth is, people don't think about you as much as you think they do. And that's just a fact. And we have to all keep that in mind. But I'm sure I know there have been some comments, and maybe there's a lot more than I know. I don't know. And I think it tied back to some of the work I've done, some of the research I've done. I think ABIND, that may have lost some people. Some people didn't like that term. Other people loved it, but some people didn't like what we were doing. I think I had this one episode where I had a setback, and some of the coaches noted that, and some other people noticed that, and they felt I was far too negative. And a lot of that stuff's been said. I've heard some of it, and I'm sure there's I'm guessing there might be some more that I haven't heard, and that's okay. I'm not avoiding it. I don't mind some criticism. I really don't. I've never been one to run away from criticism. I think it's constructive, especially if it's based in fact and reality. And I would love to have the chance to respond to people who might criticize me, because maybe they're right, and maybe I can learn from it, or maybe it's a misunderstanding. And I think in the case of this, maybe that is too. But I wanted to clarify all these things a little bit, and that is, what is my podcast? And the one thing I promised at day one, when I very first started the podcast, oh, there goes my foot. I'm feeling it throbbing. It's not quite kicking into high gear, but sitting here in the chair, and I feel like my foot was about to go out on me, which I would have, jumped up and grabbed my foot and done anything to stop it, but I think it's kind of subsiding. So anyway, what was I saying again? Benzo cramp there. Oh, I love it when my brain does that, moving my foot around to kind of get the tingling to subside a little bit. What I promised day one on this podcast is to be honest, share with you my experiences. I don't believe, and maybe other coaches, and not other coaches, I'm not necessarily a coach, I'm a podcaster, although I have coached people, but it's been more informal basis, and I've worked with almost 1,000 people now going through benzo withdrawal, and I've been on multiple research teams, and I have, I think, 6 now published papers with my name on it in research communities. I helped found, I've done a lot of things in the benzo community. So number one, if people out there saying I don't know what I'm talking about, I dare to differ. I think I've learned a few things. I'm not saying I'm the most knowledgeable person out there on benzodiazepines, but I do believe I'm pretty knowledgeable on benzodiazepines. And I know a lot of things, and I've learned a lot, and I think that can help people. But one of the main things I mentioned early on was this, and that was to be honest with what I've gone through, of my true experiences. And if I'm having a setback at 9.5 years, I'm not going to lie to you. And yes, I'm using the term setback. I'm sorry if it sounds too negative, but I'm going to be honest. A setback does not mean I went back to the beginning. That's not what setback means. It means I took a few steps back. Okay? I'm not nearly as bad as I was the first couple years coming off of Klonopin. And for those who don't know my story really quickly, I was on clonazepam or Klonopin for 12 years, up to 2 milligrams. When I realized I might be dependent, I tapered off to over 18 months. I have now been benzo-free for 9.5 years. I will be 10 years in August. Will be my 10th anniversary of being off benzodiazepines. I had the first few years were really difficult for me, but then I started getting better and better, and I was doing pretty solid there for a long period of time. When I got my third or fourth bout of COVID, yes, I've had it a few times, I wound up with long COVID, and a very recent one just happened. I think in March I picked up COVID down in Arizona. We believe we had COVID and brought it home. And I think I've gone up with long COVID again. I think that's kicked off another wave. So I think that combination of COVID and BIND has given me a setback. That's all I'm saying. I'm getting stronger waves now and some new symptoms, symptoms I haven't experienced before, and just stronger waves than I experienced in the last few years. So yes, I've had a setback. I'm still doing pretty good. I'm still doing relatively well. Are there possibly other causes for what's going on with me? Absolutely. It may not all be BIND or benzos. I think it's a factor, but COVID is part of it. I'm also ADHD, and that can play a factor into it. I also took a fluoroquinolone during my withdrawal, which can create neuropathy all on its own, even not related to benzodiazepines, so that could be a factor. It could be conditions I've had before I jumped in. I already had stomach distress before I even took benzodiazepines. I've had that since I was 6 months old. These are the things we have to consider. So I always want to make sure I'm clear. Not everything I talk about here is directly related to benzos and only benzos. But I'm not going to lie. If I start telling you life's great, if I start telling you I'm not struggling, if I start telling you I don't have symptoms, I'm lying to you. I am not going to do that. I'm going to tell you the truth of what I'm going through. I'm going to try to always find some positive angles, and I'm always going to try to clarify, like I just did, of what might also be some causes. But I don't know how to do this and not be honest about my experience. But you gotta remember, and I've said this, I feel like 1,000 times on this podcast, my case is extreme. It is rare. The vast majority of people coming off of long-term benzodiazepine use will never deal with what I'm still dealing with at this time. Are there people that have gone 10 years and still had BIND? Absolutely. But we're a small group. And often there's other factors that have played into it. So, do I think I've lost some listeners because I may not be positive enough? Yeah, I'm sure I have. Do I think I've lost some listeners because BIND was a term that people didn't want to have? And I think people who were also on SSRIs or SNRIs, antidepressants, and other drugs don't like that term because I think it isolates us, or there's a lot of things. And I've heard this, and I've heard new terms like ABIND and other ones that have come along. And hey, use whatever term you want to. I don't own terminology for benzodependence and withdrawal. And neither does the research team that I'm just a member of. We don't own it. We proposed a term called benzodiazepine-induced neurological dysfunction, BIND, in a paper that was published in a peer-reviewed journal, +1, and we proposed that. It was a team of like 5 of us that work on that paper that do that, and I'm one of the authors on that paper. And then I'm also a member of the nosology team who created the term BIND, which is 23 medical professionals, some with lived experience and some that are doctors, a gamut of different people. And they developed that term. So suddenly slapping an A on it, well, Is it accurate? No, because this went through a huge process to become a published term in a publication paper. And I'll put a link to it here and some information on BIND if you want to in this podcast. But that's my response to people coming up with other terms. I don't think they're appropriate, but also people can make up whatever term they want to call it. Benzo brain was around for years. It's not a medical term. Other people we've worked with have, another term on benzodiazepine withdrawal had come out only weeks or months before we came out with ours. There's other people out there working on this and coming with terminology. BIND got some attention. It got picked up in Psychology Today. It got picked up on a lot of major news outlets. We got some attention from it, and I'm glad we did. I think it's really good. Would I like for BIND to become an overall term that defines the protracted state of neurological dysfunction from long-term benzodiazepine use? Yes, I would love for that. I think it's a good term. I think it was evaluated well, and I think it's very appropriate. This is not benzo withdrawal, the acute stage that we first have the first few months off the drug. This is that different protracted condition, and that's where some of the confusion comes from too. Please go to our site at easinganxiety.com/bind, and you can learn all kinds of things about BIND if you'd like to. I have a lot of resources on that page, on that site, so please take a look at that. I don't know. I'm thinking about other things here for a second, but I got to go get some lunch in a little bit. But I think BIND is still a good term. I think the other pushback we had, just really quick, is from SSRIs and SNRIs and other drugs. And they want a term that grabs all of that. And I get that. And I'm not saying we shouldn't have a term that captures all of it. Okay? But I also think we need specific terms because some drugs are different. Benzodiazepines and alcohol are the only two drugs that can actually kill you in acute withdrawal. It's rare, but it can happen. These other drugs don't do that by themselves. Now, when combined with other drugs, sure, that could happen. But by themselves, these drugs are different. And benzodiazepines act different. They act on different receptors. SSRIs, SNRIs, serotonin, selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor. It acts on the serotonin production. Benzodiazepines work on GABA, glutamate. They have different mechanisms in the body. That's why I don't feel these should be grouped together. They're different drugs with different mechanisms and different long-term complications. Does this mean I in any way diminish that SSRIs, SNRIs, and other drugs may have long-term complications? Absolutely not. I believe they do have some long-term complications. I've seen them in some people, and I'm not denying that. I am not denying that at all. It's not my area of expertise. My area of focus is benzodiazepines and Z drugs since they act a lot like benzodiazepines. That's it. I've had many people ask me to do more work on SSRIs and everything all the time, and I haven't because it's not my area. I'm staying focused where I am. Benzodiazepines have some unique problems to them that other drugs don't have. And I think it's important to keep those two things separate. I know many of you are on multiple medications, and you would love to have something that handles all that. And I understand that. I'm just not the person to do it. BIND is specific to benzodiazepines and can also be carried over to Z drugs to some degree. But it's different than these other drugs and what they have. We need research on them, and we have a lot of research on them. But if there's a term that's specific to SSRIs and SNRIs and other drugs like that, let's create one. People go out there and figure that out. It's just not my area. Okay, that's my soapbox there on that one. I didn't mean to carry on that much on that topic, but I'm already over half an hour here, so I probably should start to wrap this up. Anyway, I realized that some people, I even heard a comment that somebody had lost faith in me, that I was no longer evidence-based or something. I don't know. I hear things sometimes, okay? And I just want you all to know that I don't think I've ever been less evidence-based on this. After being on research teams for so long, it's like, I don't know how that makes me less evidence-based. But, everybody has the right to their opinion, and I believe in that. And I believe in criticism, and I believe that it's okay. All I'm trying to say here is that I'm staying true to what I started to do on the Benzo Free podcast, which is be honest about what I'm going through and try to help all of us find support, connection, to find answers, to get help, to understand this thing, to work through it as best we can. I think that's important. Anyway, I got to go. I got to grab some food, and I got to pop up to my in-laws and help out my wife with a few things. So I'm going to go do that. Hopefully my foot will hold up and not freak out on the drive up, which it does sometimes. And we'll do the best we can. We'll keep moving forward. I'm still very hopeful. I'm still very optimistic. And I still know that all of us, any of us, can manage this and can overcome this and can beat this. So please hang with me. I love to hear from you. I am really paying attention to comments lately, especially since they dwindled down. I can pay a lot more attention to them. Comments on YouTube, I definitely check those almost once a day. I try to check the ones on our website too as much as possible. So please let me know what you think, and I look forward to hearing from you. I think that's it. I think that wraps it up. Murphy is still asleep, laying behind me, and I'm going to get some lunch. Keep calm. Oh my God, I forgot my closing. I'm sure some of you probably know it. Keep calm, taper. Yeah, that's it. I think it's keep calm, taper slowly, and take care of you. That was it. God, boy, my brain. Anyway, keep calm, taper slowly, and take care of yourself. I'll see you next time. Bye now. Hey, this is Dee. Thank you so much for stopping by and checking out our podcast. I do need to remind everyone that this podcast is for informational purposes only and should never be considered medical, psychological, or professional health advice of any kind. You can read our full disclaimer on our website at easinganxiety.com/disclaimer. Also, if you or someone you know is dealing with significant mental health issues, please seek professional help. Resources can be found in our show notes and on our website at easinganxiety.com. Thanks again for stopping by, and remember, keep calm, taper slowly, and take care of yourself. I'll see you next time.